This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist, the last show of the year. As you can see, Jack is not here. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, try to be full-time observer, joined by Hall of Fame promoter Russell Peltz. Russell, how are you tonight? Thanks for coming on, and were your holidays good?
I'm feeling great, Frank. Holidays are terrific. Looking forward to tonight.
You look a little cold, Russell. Where are you?
I'm in Florida. It's only like 50, 52. We're freezing down here.
Okay, and I woke up yesterday morning and it was 8 degrees.
Oh, God.
Went out and started both cars to make sure the batteries didn't die, and they turned right over, so we're good.
Okay.
Now, I didn't really prepare for this show. I don't have to do that when you're on. But as I said on Facebook, I just want to pick your brain on some certain things about different fights and fighters and promoters. So let me get the elephant out of the room before we get into boxing. Here's a question I've always wanted to ask you because I know you're a big sports guy. Aside from boxing, what would you say your next favorite sport is?
College basketball.
College basketball? And I know you went to Temple.
Yeah.
You went to Temple, so you're a big Temple guy, right?
Absolutely. Win or lose. Although it's tough lately. It's really tough lately.
So do you follow MMA?
No, not at all.
Not at all? You couldn't name a couple MMA fighters? Did we freeze up?
I can name Ronda Rousey. That's UFC.
Okay. All right, Russell. You're known for being one of the best promoters in the history of Philadelphia, maybe the history of boxing, okay?
Oh.
Tell the people watching, because I had a couple of people text me about this, and they wanted me to ask you, what did you like the most about promoting, and what did you like the least?
The best thing about promoting is when you're in the arena and everybody is loving the fights. They're standing up, cheering something that you helped put together. That's always been, from the very first show I ever promoted, that's always been the most satisfying. That, and it's a two-pronged answer. The other answer is watching a kid develop from day one and become a world champion, whether it's Jeff Chandler or Jason Sosa, and knowing that you played a role in that development.
What's the negative?
The negative is negotiating money with, it's the promoter's job to make the fight for the, I don't want to say the least amount. What the promoter figures is a fair amount of money, and it's the manager and the fighter's job to try and get the most money. And that makes for a contentious relationship. I've always said to writers, journalists over the years, you guys are really friendly with the fighters because you give them publicity in the paper. You don't have to go in there and argue money with them. There's a big difference. And it's not until years later that in some cases you actually become friendly with the fighters. But there were plenty that understood. The problem over the years with boxing, especially in the last 30 plus years, is the managers today have no idea what it takes to promote a show, the expenses, things like that. There were old timers like Joe Granby who had Bob Montgomery, Tex Cobb, Richie Cates, Tony Thornton, Charlie Scott. He would come to me. I remember one night we sold out the arena with Kitten Hayward and Cyclone Hart, 7,000 people. We took in $43,000, and I made about 4,000 on the show. And Granby knew. He came up to me that night. He said, "You got a big crowd here, son, but you didn't make any money." I said, "How do you know, Joe?" He said, "You paid too much." But sometimes I made fights because I wanted to see them. And when
Wow.
you're a fan and you love it, I took Kitten Hayward out to dinner, and Sam Solomon, who had Cyclone Hart, said, "Don't give him more than 20% of the gate." And he wanted 25. And 1971, I was 24. Kitten Hayward had been around. He knew the business. He was, unlike most fighters, he knew the bit. He said, "I'm not fighting him for less than." I said, "Well, I'm going to put Briscoe on the show. I'm going to put Augie Pantelis on the show. This is going to make the gate bigger." "I don't care. I want 25%. So I gave up 45% to the main event, 20 to Hart and 25 to Hayward. And when you have Briscoe underneath and you have Augie Pantelis underneath, who was a big featherweight ticket seller, you got him a lot of expenses. So that's the tough part, the negotiating. But that's, of course, the phone call the week of the fight. That every time when you're a promoter and you get a phone call the week of the fight, you don't want
a fighter blown out.
Yeah, that's especially today when there's so few fighters around and they hold you up. But that's the worst part of the fight. If Dr. J gets sick, the Sixers were still going to play that night. Nobody was going to stay home. A fighter gets sick, that's a different story.
Russell, back in the 70s, when I was boxing at Joe Frazier's gym, and you get to talk to these guys, and they let their guard down a little bit, which they're not going to do around maybe the promoter or the paper guys. The common theme that came out that I seemed to pick up was the fighters always thought either the promoter or the manager was holding out more. In other words, if you go to, say, Teddy Mann and say, "You want to fight Richie, I got to fight with Richie Bennett for X amount of dollars." Well, Teddy Mann subconsciously might think, well, if he's offering me this, maybe he really has 10 or 15% more, but he wants to see if I'll go for it, and then hold the rest. Do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Where it's like, it's like, I don't want to say who it is, but there's a middleweight that I know, that who you promoted, that he always heard voices like that and always thought there was more money than there was, and he wasn't getting it all. So I would imagine that makes it very tough.
But you read the book, my book.
Right.
Okay? How many people would believe if I told them that we lost money on 62 straight shows at the Blue Horizon over a period of years before USA came in? How many people would believe that?
They wouldn't, Russell, but they would say, "Well, how'd you stay in business?"
You had other fighters on the outside making money, or when I was on salary from the Sands, but that has nothing to do with who's coming to a fight. If I'm making money, if Benny Briscoe's fighting in overseas and I'm making money because he's fighting overseas and I booked him, that doesn't affect what I'm trying to do the next week at the Blue Horizon. Who's ever fighting at the Blue Horizon, they're not entitled to the money I made with Benny Briscoe. I might feel better if I have a big payday. Let's say a promoter goes out and his fighter fights somewhere and the promoter's end is 50 grand. Okay. So then when you come back and you're running at the Blue Horizon, you say, okay, maybe I'll invest 10 of that 50 grand to get the show off the ground. You do that on your own, but you don't really have to. That's why
Russell,
I wrote the book. That's why I wrote the book.
And again, so I read the book twice.
People don't want to believe the book. That's up to them. I wrote the book because I got tired of what I was reading on the internet from today's from 21st century, alleged 21st century journalists, or just fans who, as I said in the book, act, weren't around, but act like they were around, so they know, allegedly.
I got you exactly. And what I've tried to tell guys too, when everybody has all the answers, and I'm talking more or less on the fighter side where they say, well, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he listen to this guy? They don't understand too, and I know you know this, how these guys are pulled and how many street lawyers are talking to them all the time and clouding their head up with, they don't know what the numbers are. They don't know anything. All they know is that they should be doing this for you. And they put that in the fighter's head and it poisons them.
You know what they should do, Frank? They should go out and do it themselves then. I've been doing it. I did it for 50 years and I survived a lot of other promoters. And the one thing I realized when all the ones that were around when I started, Lulu Casey and Herman, well, of course, Herman was at the end, Herman Taylor and Jimmy Riggio, but the new ones that came in over the years, their main goal was more, let's put Russell out of business rather than concentrate on their own shows and make good fights. I always tell new promoters, make good fights. If you don't succeed, no one can say you blew it because you made bad fights. If you're going to go down with good fights.
Russell, I'm looking at a card right now. I'm on Philly Boxing. And the reason why I'm looking at this card, it's probably not that important to you, but it was April 3rd, 1979. I know you know who the main event was.
April 3rd, 79. That was Hearns and Heyman. Wait.
Hearns and Heyman.
Yeah, Hearns and Heyman.
Hearns and Heyman. Hearns is 17-0, 17 knockouts, undefeated. Heyman's the first guy to go the distance with him. The reason why I'm focusing on this card, because I want to know about a fighter on the card. I, at that time, had just become friends with Tex Cobb, and he fought on that card.
Terrible fight.
So I said, Randall, who are you fighting? And he says, I don't know, partner, but you better get there early. And get there early became an inside joke with us. So he fought a guy named Zach Ferguson. Tell me about Zach Ferguson.
All I remember is the fight.
Cobb knocked him out in the first round.
First round. That's all I remember. Zach Ferguson.
Okay. That card consisted of, think about this, and this goes back to what we're talking about, putting fights together. You look back at that card now. On that card, you had Hearns, who was an emerging superstar who went on to become an all-time great, fighting Heyman, a guy who'd been around and fought everybody. Jeff Chandler fought Davey Vasquez. We know how great he turned out to be. Teddy Mann fought Richie Bennett. Good local fight between tough middleweights. Jerry Martin fought Don Addison. Jerry Martin fought how many times for the title, Russell? 3? Didn't he fight Sod, Braxton, and Eddie?
No, he fought Sod. Yes, you're right. And Eddie, right. Yeah. Sod,
he
Braxton.
fought all 3. Okay. Right. Underneath, Curtis Parker, Arnell Thomas. Parker was the top-ranked contender for a while and fought everybody that was somebody except Hagler during that 80-82 era. Then we have Cobb. Well, we know who he fought. He fought Holmes. He fought Shavers. He fought Norton. He fought Mercado. And underneath Cobb, this spoiler, Kevin Howard. Only guy to drop Sugar Ray Leonard. Now, there's 7 bouts, and of those 7 bouts, 2 of those guys went on to be champions in Hearns and Chandler. Martin fought for the title 3 times. Parker never fought for the title, but he was as good as the guys that did fight for the title back then. We know Cobb did, and we know that Kevin Howard did. How much work did it take to put a card like that together, if you remember? It couldn't have been easy.
Yeah, oh, sure. It wasn't hard. First of all, as you know, the main event was supposed to be Bobby Chacon and Jerome Artis, and they both fell out. So
because the card was postponed for March.
Yes, correct. And because then Hearns got sick and we had to delay it. But Hearns, Emmanuel Stewart wanted Hearns to fight in Philadelphia because we were doing big business through the end of '78, and he didn't figure Heyman was much of a threat. And Chandler and Vasquez, I mean, that's what guys did back then, Frank. They fought each other. Like, before casinos, everybody fought in somebody's hometown. You either fought a kid from your city or you fought in somebody's hometown. Today, they don't want to do it. We had a lot of good fighters around, Frank. I mean, Howard, Martin, Parker,
Stafford, Singletary, Caveman, Fletcher.
Yeah, it was. Guys wanted to fight. You'd go into a gym and guys would say, "Get me a fight." They wouldn't say, "I don't want to fight a lefty. I don't want to fight a guy from New York. He's too tall. I don't like his trainer." They just wanted to fight. There was no video. There was no YouTube. There was no box rec. They just wanted to fight.
I love those days, Russell. And like so many things in this world, they're never coming back. I don't see, because as I said on a show we did before, the people that want to change things and make them better don't have the power. And the guys that have the power that could implement the change have no interest to.
So let me tell a story about that show that you read about in the book. So for people who haven't read the book, after Chacon and Artis pulled out, we elevated Hearns to the main event. And Hearns came into town a week ahead of time and was training at Frazier's gym.
Yep.
And I go into the gym one day and Emmanuel Stewart says, has my lawyer spoken to you yet? I said, no, what about? He said, well, you'll get a call. So I go back to the office at the Spectrum and I get a call from Emmanuel's lawyer who wants to renegotiate the purse because Hearns was now in the main event. And I knew the card was weak without Chacon, who'd made a big hit there. And I went back and forth with the guy and I cursed him out. And I finally agreed to give Hearns, he was getting $5,000. I agreed to give him $6,000 and a percentage of the gate. Okay. And I was really pissed off. So the night of the fight. We didn't do that much business. We had about 4,500 people there. And when it came time to pay Hearns at the end of the show, I didn't give him $6,000. I told the Spectrum ahead, Emmanuel Stewart never signed the new contract. Okay, the one for $6,000, which I had typed up. So we paid him the $5,000. And when he came to the room to get paid, I made sure all the security guards were around so there'd be no trouble. But the president of the Spectrum knew what was going on. And he said, where's the extra money? I said, you never signed the contract, Emmanuel. Okay.
Right.
So he took the contract that he did sign and he went to Howard McCall, the commissioner. He said, Russell was supposed to play the theme from Rocky when we walked into the ring. He didn't play it. He was supposed to give us Grant gloves. Instead, he gave us Everlast gloves. I forget So the commissioner said to him, Emmanuel, you're showing me the old contract. So that's the one I'm going to uphold.
Enforce.
Russell doesn't have to pay you the $5,000. Now, listen, I was wrong, okay, because I've always valued my word, and I shouldn't have done that, okay? It turned out that we made like $750 on the show, so we would have lost a couple bucks if we given him the extra money. So when I wrote the book, and I got Jackie Callan to get me in touch with Hearns, I had an attack of guilt. Okay, so this is 1979. You're talking 89, over 40 years later. I got Hearns' address and I sent him a cashier's check for $1,000.
Wow.
So when he was on the phone with me and Jackie said, how about that, Thomas? That's a Christmas gift. He said, yeah, but it's worth a lot more money today.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll give you a story about the training for the fight. You may have heard me tell it before, but as you said, Hearns came into Philly that week, about a week, 10 days before the fight, went to Frazier's. He came in wearing a pinstripe suit, camera crew following him, everything. He's the man. Russell, he didn't talk to anybody in the gym. He beat the hell out of Johnny Cooper, and he beat up Stafford. Wouldn't talk to anybody. About 3 or 4 days before the fight, that he needed some sparring. Well, guess who was the only guy there that could spar him?
Oh.
Curtis Parker. Everybody knew when Parker got in the when they saw that Parker and Hearns were gloving up, all the guys training Jim said this is going to be good, because I think at that time Parker was 10-0, full of confidence, thought he could beat King Kong, and here he had King Kong in front of him almost. They get in the ring. For about the first minute and a half, Hearns is doing pretty good, jabbing Curtis. Curtis is bringing the heat, but he's eating jabs, but he's not hurt. Second round, Curtis finds his rhythm, gets him against the ropes, and works him over for the whole round. After that, they call time. They end the sparring. Hearns gets out of the gym, Russell, and he talked to everybody in the gym. After a week of not saying anything to anybody, after getting his ass handed to him, now he's friendly. Hi, I'm Thomas. Nice to meet you. True story. But I remember the day he came in with the pinstripes, and he had the hat on, and he wouldn't talk to anybody.
Emmanuel told me that after every single fight coming up, he bought a brand new suit. He was 17-0 at the time, so he must have had 17 suits.
17 suits, right? And that was the first time he went the distance, and everybody was shocked. Right. We all thought the fight was going to go 3 rounds.
Right, and it got a
standing ovation. Now Heyman was beat up
because Heyman went the limit. He got a standing ovation. Yep,
Hearns gets a decision but loses a record. I think was the here it is the promo they had there. Heyman wins cheers, loses decision. That sounds about right, right?
So I like to tell people I promoted the fight that Thomas Hearns first went the limit.
Exactly.
Right.
And let me ask you this: at that time, did you think he was going to go on to be as great as he was, as he eventually became? Because I wasn't sure at that time.
I think that was the first time we saw him fight. I don't know if there was video of him from Detroit earlier, because most of his fights were in Detroit. I don't know. I don't know that I thought about that one way or another.
I wasn't as sure as what the press clippings were that he was going to go on to become an all-time great, but I have him as an all-time great. I think he's one of the top 5 welterweights ever, and one of the top 10 to 15 greatest pound-for-pound punchers ever. Would you agree?
I don't like to listen. I might have told you my theory. My theory is he's in the top 100. I say Floyd Mayweather's in the top 100. Joe Louis is in the top 100. It's just, I don't like
when you're getting there, you're splitting hairs.
Yeah, listen, even in the Harold Johnson, Bob Foster argument that we had, could Bob Foster have hit Harold Johnson on the chin and knocked him out if they fought 10 times? Maybe. Yes. Sure. Could have happened. And maybe Harold outboxes him eight times, or they fight a draw. I just, people say, well, Lennox Lewis would crush John L. Sullivan. He would absolutely crush him. I said, okay, are they fighting in 1890? Or are they fighting in 2007? Because if they're fighting in 1890, Lennox Lewis has taken a train to Richburg, Mississippi, and he's going to fight like this, like they fought in those days.
Right.
Upside down. And there's going to be a lot of roughhousing. And suppose Sullivan grabs him around the waist and throws him to the ground, and you got to come to scratch within so many seconds. So you can't compare fighters from different eras. Hearns is one of the top 100 fighters of all time.
And I realize the older I get, Russell, you really do have to stay in their era and what they did. Is it fair to put Joe Louis in with Tyson Fury? You really can't say and be conclusive on who would win.
I tell this story, and I don't want to get in trouble for it, and maybe you know it. When Jack Johnson fought Jim Jeffries in Reno in 1910, he walked into a stadium of like 20,000 white people, okay? But there was a popular song of the day that they played not only when he walked to the ring, but while all through the week leading up to it in Reno. And the song was titled, you could look it up, All Coons Look Alike to Me. That was
I remember reading that.
How many of today's black athletes could handle that? So there's a lot more than just who can throw a better jab and who can do. Training has changed. Transportation has changed. Eating has changed. Would Lennox Lewis be 6'7" in 1890? I doubt it. I doubt it. So,
No, I agree. You just can't compare eras. You can't put Marciano in with Lennox Lewis. But the one thing I will say, Russell, is a middleweight was still 160 pounds when Ketchel fought compared to when Monzon fought. And I think we can get a little bit better gauge on that, where if we try to compare Muhammad Ali to Tyson Fury, Ali never fought a guy 6'9" that was athletic. Ali took a great punch, but how many guys weigh 270 that could throw a punch, hit him? How do we know how the fight turns out? We don't know. So we have to go on what they did during their era.
right.
Is the way is how I look at it now. So I used to be really definitive about that and say, oh no, this guy beats that guy. I'd like to think I get a little smarter as I get older, and I don't look at it that way. But I can tell you one thing that happened that you and I were involved in. Speaking of controversies, we were in a debate with Harold Johnson and Bob Foster about a month ago. And Russell, I don't know about you, but I thought we clearly got the better of that debate.
I don't know who the judges were. I don't know if it was Adelaide Bird or Eugenia Williams was doing the judging that night. And I looked at Harold's record today. Harold got stopped. Let's see, he was 76-11, 87 pro fights. Amazing, he never had a draw. Of the 5 times he got stopped, one was when he was 43 years old on a headbutt before they had the headbutt rule. One was when he collapsed at the Poison Orange against Julio.
Right.
Martinez. The other 3 times he got stopped, Archie Moore in the 14th round of a fight.
And he dropped him before he got stopped.
Jersey Joe Walcott, no slouch there. And, Boardwalk Billy Smith, which I've seen the tape, and Zach Clayton did one of his waving the guy out, Harold out at like the split second at 10, 9.9. I mean, that happens. So that's pretty good company. That's pretty good company.
Yeah, I actually thought we had the easier case to make because when you look at their records, it's just so much easier to envision guys that Johnson fought and beat handling Foster, where I don't think you could say the opposite.
No, Johnson before he became champion beat better fighters than Foster ever beat. I mean,
during Foster's reign.
You know, Bob Satterfield, Bob Baker, Nino Valdez, who was a big heavyweight for those
Bivens,
Ezra Charles, Bivens. Yeah, it's just, and like I said, he goes to Germany and fights a German, Gustav Scholz, who's like 70-2 with 3 Europeans scoring the fight. I mean, come on, nobody does that, and wins a decision.
And people forget, Russell, that Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay both avoided. They had chances to fight Johnson, and neither one wanted to do it.
But you know what would have been a good fight that I've never seen come up on Facebook? Harold Johnson against Floyd Patterson, because Patterson was not a big heavyweight. That would have been an interesting fight. You know, Patterson had incredible hand speed.
That would have been a great fight. But if Johnson can beat the likes of Charles, you got to think he can live with Patterson.
Yeah.
Because I would not favor Patterson over Charles. No, but then again, you can look at it where even though he was older, Floyd killed Archie Moore, where Harold had, he lost 4 out of 5 to him, but it was a different Moore that he fought.
Yeah, a lot of people are skeptical of Moore in that fight. Somebody at a card show signing or a Hall of Fame years ago, I heard a story. Somebody asked Moore about the Patterson fight, and he said he didn't want to talk about it. I don't know.
Okay, let me ask you one more thing to clear up the controversy. We could put it to bed. What was going on with you and Randy Gordon during that debate? Because I know nothing about that. When we were debating Jack and Don, were you texting with Randy Gordon?
Not at all. No, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. Jack said I
Because
was
Jack said
texting
that
with
he
him.
ran into Randy Gordon at Ring 8, and he said that you and him were having a conversation during the debate, and you kept looking down at your phone.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
All
I
right,
don't know anything about it.
I'm glad we have this on tape. They can't take it yet, Russell, that we kicked their butt and that we had the easier case to make. That's all there is to it. We had the easier case to make. All right. Do you follow current boxing?
A little bit. Like I watched the Jared Anderson, Jerry Forrest fight the other night because I was interested in it. But when Teofimo Lopez came on, I fell asleep in the third round. So I don't follow it like I used to. It just doesn't interest me today because you have fights in a vacuum. Like in the old days, A would beat B, C would beat D, and then A would fight C 2 months later.
Right.
That doesn't happen today. How could Boots Ennis have one fight in 2022? How could that happen? How could Spence and Crawford? I mean, listen, Dan Raphael wrote a few weeks ago what I've been saying for years. Make the money, fight once or twice a year, make 10, 15 million. That's great. But don't go around talking about your legacy because you have none. These guys don't have a legacy. Please. And Spence and Crawford, they're both to blame. We're not on the inside, so we don't really know what's going on.
I don't like taking sides on that debate either, Russell, because we're not on the inside. But do you think if they both really wanted the fight, it could be made? Because I don't know if I agree with that, because I think if one of the managers, and in this case it would be Heyman, and I don't want to pick on him, but I mean, I think that Spence is going to do what he says, and if he's going to say it's not the right fight, it's not the right money, Spence isn't going to do it.
Then he can forget his legacy, because he should go to Heyman and say, make the fight, or I'm going to the press and I'm telling him you don't want to make the fight. I want to make the fight. You can't stop a fighter from making a living. All Heyman can do is hold up his end of the purse. He cannot stop the fight. That's you can't stop a person from earning a living. I learned that over the years with a couple different lawsuits that I was involved in. All Heyman can do is get his percentage.
Okay. So then we blame both guys, and it's a shame because I think they're both outstanding fighters. I think Crawford has all-time great potential. Have you seen him enough? Do you agree or disagree, or you need to see more?
It's hard for me to judge, because when you say it's the best fight out there, okay, it's the best fight out there for the boxing public, okay? It's not even a pimple on an elephant's backside compared to Leonard and Hearns, okay? That was probably the biggest welterweight fight of mine. It was. I mean, this is, see, Heyman spoiled the fighters when he came in with that $500 million, and he started overpaying them. So if you're paying Crawford Spence $5,000 to fight Joe Schmo, now you want him to fight Crawford. Well, God, he's going to want 10, 15, 20 million, because you've been overpaying him based on ratings and based on tickets sold for years. I think the biggest roadblock to these big fights has been Heyman over the years, and he forced the other promoters to come up with more money too. I mean, ESPN, they're only using boxing as a lead-in they have to have boxing because they're the all sports network.
Right.
Okay? I don't like what they're doing, but they're giving Arab like $85 million a year to put on fights. Can you imagine the fights you could put on for $85 million a year instead of overpaying these guys? I mean, you could revive the business. When I was at ESPN, I wanted to stay away from casinos. I wanted to go into small towns, not just the Blue Horizon, Steubenville, Ohio, Chicago, not that that's a small city, where the fans have to pay. Because you go to casinos, a lot of casinos, you're under 21, you're not getting in. And then and in the casinos, like when we were at the Sands in the 80s, we had Frank the Animal Fletcher and Jeff Chandler. So it was like being in Philly. But today you get a fighter from Boston and you match him up with a fighter from Dallas and you put it in some godforsaken casino in Des Moines, Iowa. what kind of fan base can you build?
They don't care about the other guy.
Right. That's not how Vinny Pazienza was built in Rhode Island or Ray Mancini in Youngstown. You got to go into the backyards if you're going to do it right.
Yeah, I agree, and that's it's definitely killing the sport, and it's a shame too, because I really do think that there are some fighters out there today that have greatness potential, but we just don't see it because they don't measure themselves, they don't fight each other. I mean, and there's also, even though you would say this is not a strong heavyweight era, there are some fights I would like to see that I think would be good fights. I mean, are they going to be the Thrill Manila or Super Fight 1? Of course not. But they're going to be exciting fights that could get people juiced back into the sport.
No, you're right. And there's good fighters out there, but you can't look at Teofimo Lopez when he's 16-0 and have some announcer say that he's the best, he's as good as Willie Pep. You can't say things like that. ESPN had an Olympic kid on a few months ago named Ricardo Torres, and he's fighting some kid. Now, you and I know there are times when you see a guy loosening up in the corner before a fight. You
can see,
yeah, this guy.
He almost killed that guy.
Yeah, and Tessitore, he acted like it was Lewis and Schmeling. Now, maybe ESPN wants him to do that. Now, can you imagine what Teddy Atlas would have said during that fight? As opposed to,
well, he would have said that who was the guy that got defeated? I forget his name.
I can't remember.
He would have said he don't belong.
Right. And he didn't belong.
No, and he almost got really hurt, and I felt bad for him and glad he was okay.
And listen, Brad Goodman is as good a matchmaker as there is in boxing today. But I think he's got some restrictions on what he can do with some of these Olympic kids. But yeah, listen, I was interested in Jerry Forrest and Jared Anderson, and I thought Jerry Forrest landed a lot of good shots in that first round. But hey, Anderson took them and he came back and he did what he had to do. He looks like, so far, he's got the real goods so far.
Down the road, he could be a player after, say, Fury and Usyk. Now,
could be.
Right. Have you seen Usyk?
Yeah, I've seen Usyk. But I'm not going to. I can't say that Usyk is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, like these people are saying. Listen, you earlier tonight you said you know more than you knew years ago because it's experience. It's just like with a fighter. How can a fighter who's ranked number 6 today with a 15-0 record or 15-1, how can he compare to a guy, say, like Henry Hank, who was 45 wins, 12 losses, and 2 draws?
Right.
Just the experience alone. And I don't want to hear about the amateurs. I don't want to hear that. It's a different ball game. I mean, Tommy Hearns couldn't knock out anybody in the amateurs.
Right. He had like 12 knockouts.
Right. It's just a different ball game. I mean, is Lomachenko one of the greatest featherweight junior lightweights of all time? I don't like to rate a fighter till his career is over because, as I've said many times, if Tyson had retired in '88 after knocking out Michael Spinks, he'd be up on there on the Mount Rushmore of heavyweight champions. But now,
Roy Jones, after beating Ruiz, the same thing.
Right. So you can't rate a fighter till his career's over.
I totally agree with that. But what I meant about Usyk, though, here's what I like about him, Russell. I like the fact that he's about the same size as Ali or Holmes, and he's showing that if you can fight and you can box, size is not the be-all, end-all. And he took Joshua apart, and everybody's going to say, okay, Joshua's not Joe Louis. No, but he is 6'6". He has good form. He has power. He's not a natural-born fighter. He's an athlete that's being taught to fight, where Usyk is a real fighter. And I like the idea that a guy that weighs 223 pounds can take apart a guy that weighs 250. And I think that does say something for Usyk.
Yes, he's a good fighter, but let's not go crazy. Let's not compare him to Joe Louis or Jack Dempsey or things like that. When I had Mike Jones, the welterweight, remember Mike Jones? He was,
yes,
and he was, I don't know, 25-0, 26-0. Bruce Trampler, the matchmaker for Top Rank, he said to me one day, he said, but could he beat Alfonso Heyman? And I had to think for a second. And I said, I'm not sure. I wouldn't bet the bank on it. And Alfonso Heyman was just a guy back in the day. He was just a guy. I mean, he had his little run where he knocked out William Watson and beat Johnny Gant, but he was just a guy. And
that's a good way to put it. And I've heard you say that before. I see we have a comment there, Russell. I don't know who this is directed at. No one can move a fighter's career as well as Don Majeski. Russell, you take that.
You got to give me an example. I want an example. And listen, I love Don Majeski, but I didn't know that any one fighter that he was involved in for that long a period of time that you could say Don Majeski moved his career. So I seriously, I would like to know that, because maybe I'm missing out on something.
Okay, well, Jack, I'm sure if you hear that, get back to us on that, and it'll definitely be put up. All right, Russell.
Fighter's good. Top Rank. Listen, Top Rank they've got the best. Brad Goodman and Bruce Trampler. There's a thing about the difference to me all those years between Don King and Bob Arum was some CEOs are afraid to hire quality guys because they're afraid that those guys know more than they do and will take over the business. Now, Bob Arum had Teddy Brenner, Bruce Trampler, and now Brad Goodman. Don King had, I hope the family's not listening, had Al Braverman and Patty Flood. Now, the line about Braverman, my favorite line about Braverman was he'd been around so long he invented the kickback. So that's what Flood, and it was just different. And that's why Top Rank's been able to still be relevant today, because of the people working there. Don was Butch Lewis's right-hand man, helped with Michael Spinks. Well, he helped, I don't know. Butch Lewis was Don Majeski is one of the smartest people in boxing. I've known him since he was 16, 17. He never got the credit for what he did. How much was he involved in Michael Spinks was probably the best managed fighter, as good a managed fighter as I ever saw. The job that I always attributed to Butch Lewis, the way he maneuvered him, the way he got in the heavyweight tournament, the way he snuck out of the heavyweight tournament,
right?
The lawsuits he won. He maximized Michael Spinks's finances. I mean, Butch Lewis and I had our differences, but I got to give it to him. He did a yeoman job with Michael Spinks. I don't really know how much Don was involved. He was close with Butch Lewis's. Maybe he was, and he was an advisor for George Parnassus. Hey, that's pretty good credentials.
All right, Jack. Well, he didn't help you in the debate. I can say that much.
Don was an advisor, George Parnassus. I don't know. I never talked to Don about that. George Parnassus is probably one of the top 10. Well, I can't say 100 because there's not 100 great promoters, but he was one of the greatest promoters who ever lived after he switched from managing to promoting. And he had the Forum in Inglewood sold out for guys like Ruben Oliveras and Rafael Herrera and Alexis Arguello and guys like that. But I don't know that Parnassus he took a lot of Mexicans that had been developed and he put them in monster fights in LA. And can you imagine, I wish Parnassus had written a book. I wish Eileen Eaton had written a book. I wish Don Chargan had written a book. I wish Herman Taylor had written a book, so you could find out what really went on beside who landed the left hook, how those fights came to be, what it was like dealing with. I mean, LA was hot.
Why do you think they never did write a book, Russell?
They probably weren't journalism majors in college. I don't know. Listen,
but I mean, you would think somebody would have approached them.
Yeah. I mean, I can count. Mickey Duff wrote a book called 20 and Out, and Nat Fleischer wrote a thin book on Mike Jacobs years ago. I don't know if there's ever been another book on a promoter that I can think of, unless you know of one.
I can't think offhand.
Yeah.
I definitely can't think of offhand.
I mean,
All right.
imagine Herman Taylor dealing with Wesley Mozon and Bob Montgomery and Joe Louis and Guster. I'd love to know those stories. I would love to know them.
I'd like to read some more.
Herman Taylor got paid $100,000 in 1926 to put together for Tex Rickard the Dempsey Tunney fight in what was then Sesquicentennial Stadium, later JFK. And when the fight was over, 120,000 people in a slight but steady rainstorm. After the fight, he took a lot of the women out to dinner in Center City because their dresses had gotten ruined in the rain. I want to know that stuff. I want to know what it was like. $100,000 before income tax in 1926. Amazing.
Russell, he has something else up there. What is this?
Briscoe versus GGG, who wins? What, are you going to start trouble, Jack?
Give us a thought, Russell.
Briscoe's going to hit GGG once in the cup. And GGG's, which he would do at Hopkins too, Jack, by the way. And would do it so quick, like he did with Juarez de Lima.
And Rafael Gutierrez.
Right, after the bell. It was a different world. It was a different world. Listen, GGG was a terrific fighter. When we fought him, when I had Gabe Rosado, and Gabe hung in there, one round too long, and he came back to the dressing room, and fighters rarely say this. He pulled me aside and he said, Russell, he can really punch. You don't hear that too much from fighters, so it's just a shame that, he got screwed in the trilogy with Canelo. Waiting so long, getting
not getting the decision in the first fight, which he definitely won, changed everything.
Terrible.
One guy kind of faded. The other guy became a star and lived off of that in Canelo.
Right.
Who I think is a good fighter, but he did not win the first fight.
No, not at all.
But Russell, Jack opened up a door because I wanted to ask you about this because I only have you for a couple more minutes, and I just want to know your opinion. I know you don't like these kind of questions, but I have been pressured by some guys to ask you this, and I actually have an interest too. I say a lot when I post that Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest fighter boxer ever, and the debate begins with who's number two, Greb, Armstrong, whoever, Pep, whoever. Where do you fall on that?
Well, you can't argue. I agree with everything you just said. If you're going to ask me if Floyd Mayweather is in the top 10, I'm going to say absolutely not.
I wasn't going to ask you about Mayweather, but you would. If I said to you, I never saw a boxing match before. Who's the best that ever did it? Who would you tell me to see?
Robinson.
Okay. Without a doubt, the best combination of speed, power, killer instinct, intelligence, durability. If he had a weakness, Russell, I don't know what it is.
There's never going to be another Robinson because boxing will never be like that again, where you fight every tough guy and you fight him over and you go overseas for a couple months and you fight the best over there.
5 guys, right?
And you defend your title overseas. I mean, Roy Jones, Mayweather, in their prime. Well, Mayweather never went overseas.
No, he never left the MGM.
Yeah, Roy Jones went over when he was over. When his career was over, then he made some money overseas. But it's just a different. It's a different business. It's a business. It's not a sport anymore. It's a business.
Right.
And
yeah. And Russell, I hate to blame him, but I think Mayweather had a lot to do with that.
Oh, I'm
he
sure.
conditioned the fans that if a fighter is not undefeated, he's not worth seeing. He's not worth your time. And I think that has affected some of these guys, maybe Spence, maybe Crawford, a couple other guys. That's part of the reason why we don't see the fights unless it's for a title or for $10 million.
because it's affected the guys who make the decisions at the networks also. They think you
Okay.
need a championship fight. I mean, listen, when you love boxing, when you really love it, when you fall in love with it when you're a kid like we did, and you're in high school and you find out that Dick Tiger's fighting Spider Webb Saturday night on the what then became the Saturday Night Fights, and that's your whole focus for a week. You don't concentrate in school. All you want, we would have parties every Friday and Saturday night, dance parties. You'd play 45s, and the guys and girls would, where's Peltz? He's in the basement watching Paul Pender and Ray Robinson. So when you see what that was, and you see what it's become, and then Dick Tiger went on to fight another tough guy, a month or two later, and you see what it is today when you can't even get Errol Spence and Crawford to fight each other for millions of dollars. How can you love it anymore? I mean, yes, there's good fights out there, but what did they lead to? Like I said before, Boots Ennis fought one time in 2022, or Canelo says his next fight's going to be in July. I mean, Emil Griffith would have had 3 title defenses in that time.
Right. Russell, what do you think of Boots as a talent?
He looks like the real thing from what he's fought, but once again, there's another level that he hasn't been able to get to yet because he's been frozen out. Because
Right.
If you're not aligned with Hearn, Heyman, Arum, or Golden Boy, you're on the outside looking in, and that's the network's fault. The network should never be exclusive to one promoter. Never. When USA went under in 98, the Tuesday night fights, to me, that was the first nail in the coffin. And then when ESPN left Top Rank, went to independent promoters around the country, and then went back to exclusive deal with Top Rank, an independent promoter cannot survive today unless he turns over his star, 50% of his
Right.
star, to one of those 4 promoters. It's lousy business, but that's the way it is.
Do you believe, though, and look, granted, nobody can rave about Boots' opposition, but do you agree that there are some fighters that you can look at and you can say to yourself, this guy's different?
Yeah,
because I happen to believe that, and I think Boots is one of those guys.
And it reminds me of Sugar Ray Leonard when he was coming up, and we may have talked about this before. Everybody accused Sugar Ray Leonard of fighting bums on the way up. He wasn't fighting bums.
He was not.
He was so much better than everybody. He made them look like they couldn't fight. But if you look at his record, I mean, I don't know that he ever fought a guy with a losing record. Maybe
I think I looked at that before. I think maybe 1 or 2, but that's it.
I mean, his second.
But he was fighting Armando Muniz in like his 15th fight.
Yeah, and he fought Willie Fireball
guys like that
in his second fight. Nobody does that today. The biggest hurt on Sugar Ray Leonard is that he had a short career compared to guys like Henry Armstrong and Emil Griffith and those guys. He had less than 40 fights. But I mean,
I think he's 36, 3-1, 40 exactly.
I mean, he could do it all, and people say Mayweather would handle him. I don't even want to argue. You can't even argue that. You just walk away.
No, I totally agree. But I do think that Boots, I'm not saying he's going to be Leonard, but I do think he's a guy that we're going to hear about for a long time. Okay, a couple other quick questions. I think when you used to do your show on WIP, I don't know if I ever asked you this, or maybe I did, but this is back. When did you do that show? In the 80s?
89 to
like
92. 89 to 92.
89 92. Okay. Let me ask you this, and I may have asked it, and I know the 2 names, but I want you to pick one. The greatest heavyweight of all time, Ali or Lewis? You have to pick.
Lewis.
Lewis, because why?
It was...
Because I think Joe Lewis, while you're thinking on that, Russell, I think Lewis is the best boxer in heavyweight history because Ali was not the boxer, the fundamental boxer that Lewis was. His defense were his legs and his speed. Lewis did everything the way it was supposed to be done. Everything had a reason, no wasted moment, and he was a great, great, great puncher. I think Lewis is actually the best fighter in heavyweight history, but I don't know if that equates to him beating Ali or having a better career.
Well, we discussed this earlier. It was a different era. You can't go wrong with either pick. You really can't.
Okay. So you said Lewis, so I'll go with that.
Well, the old
when it comes to
Granby said Lewis. The old timers always said Lewis because he was their hero. He was the hero of the old timers. He was their life.
Okay, let me ask you this because this is something that Jack and I argue about when it comes to the Hall of Fame. Now, I made a post a couple weeks ago. I said that under no metric is Timothy Bradley a Hall of Fame fighter. Now, there's a couple guys that you and I both respect, and they have contacted me and said, no, Frank, you're wrong. Here's why. To me, when I think of a Hall of Fame fighter, the guy, I don't care how big of his star he was, he has to be special. I love Ray Mancini. I wanted to be a middleweight Ray Mancini. He's not a Hall of Famer. What do you consider, what do you take into account when you decide that you're voting on Hall of Fame?
I had a tough time this year with the moderns because I wasn't sure.
You can make a case nobody belonged.
Right. And I understand what's going on at the Hall of Fame. They need tickets sold and their theory of only letting one old time. I mean, listen, there's two ways of looking at it. Who deserves to get in and who should be in because that guy's in. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't think I voted for, I can't remember. I'm just very disappointed in the Hall of Fame. I think Brophy had a great idea, but he didn't grow with it. Like there are years when the Baseball Hall of Fame will have one person in and it's still a mob scene there. But it seems like Canastota needs to induct a lot of modern people, either non-participants or fighters to draw people there. And
right.
It makes me feel that my induction is somewhat watered down because of who's been getting in recent years. I mean, I know I'm prejudiced toward Tom Cushman because he was the greatest boxing writer of my generation. I finally got him on the ballot this year, but there are other great writers, Eddie Muller, who John Chargan told me was a better writer than Jack Fisk, a better boxing guy. Rodrigo Valdez. I mean, and why Tiger Jack Fox finally got in this year? But why does one of the most prolific boxing writers in the country have to call me up a couple years ago and ask me about Tiger Jack Fox? I say to myself, what are you doing voting? If you have to call me and ask me about Tiger Jack Fox, you shouldn't be on the committee to vote. And that's been my
even problem. If you don't know, it's so easy to go back and research it.
It's
if you didn't say it.
And I don't want to really be negative on Tim Bradley. I don't want to put anybody down. There's probably people out there that don't think I should be in the Hall of Fame. So I don't want to rain on his parade. It's a great honor. I just think that it's out of hand. The number of people that are I understand the argument for Mancini and Gatti. Okay. They were the franchises. I understand that. Like Don Majeski argues, that made them great. You know, I can understand that, but it's just it should be for the very, 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 very best.
See, that's the way I look at it, Russell. And not to rain on Tim Bradley, I wish I could have been one half as good as him, but I just don't think of a Hall of Famer when I think of Tim Bradley.
I've heard some good arguments for him, the guys he beat, but I mean, they say he beat, an argument today is he beat like 6 world champions. I mean, everybody's a world champion today.
Right.
So listen, if there's 4 champions in the welterweight division, let's just say they're lightweight, whatever. Well, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 3 of them would have been in the top 10 and 1 would have been champion. How many top 10 guys are we inducting? We don't induct top 10 guys. Joey Archer, who might have beaten Emil Griffith twice,
right,
on the ballot, but can't get in. So he's my example. Like 50 years ago, you would have been Joey Archer. And I don't know how many people listening tonight could even talk to us about Joey Archer. Okay. So
Russell, real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
No, we're running out of time.
Okay.
They want me to mention who I think the fighter of the year is, because Jack and I won't get a chance to do that. I have to think it's Dimitri Bivol because of his wins, solid wins over Canelo. He took him to school, he undressed him, and he beat Ramirez, who was a feared guy in the division, big puncher, undefeated. So I think it's Bivol. And let me just throw a couple Philly matchups to you real quick. Give me the winner. Hopkins Giardello. I'm sorry, Briscoe Giardello.
I can't pick a winner. That's a tough fight.
Hopkins Worm.
Hopkins.
Leotis Martin, Jimmy Young.
Jimmy Young.
All right. We agree on, let's see, I like Hopkins over Worm. I like Young. I think Joey might outbox Benny. Can you live with that?
Yeah. Listen, Joey Giardello, the last great white fighter who fought every tough black fighter around.
Right.
I mean, the guy over 100 fights, over 100, fought them all. Out of shape.
All right, Russell, we could talk for hours. It was fun. I hope you had fun.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't have much of a script. I wanted to just come from a lot of different angles. You answered all my questions. You're a great guest, and I look forward to the next time. Happy New Year.
It's a pleasure. You too. Thank you.